Imagine a typical September evening in 1961. The place is Surrey, British Columbia, a quiet suburb where the air is usually thick with the scent of pine needles and the dampness of the approaching Pacific autumn. In a small, unremarkable house, 25-year-old Lucy Ann Johnson moves through the rooms of her life. She is a mother of two, a wife, a neighbor. She prepares a meal, perhaps glances at the laundry. And then she does something that will echo through the next half-century. She steps out of the front door. There are no suitcases in her hands. There is no dramatic farewell note left on the kitchen table. Just the soft, definitive click of a lock as the door closes behind her. That sound was the final punctuation mark on her existence in Surrey. She walked into the fading twilight and simply vanished. The silence that followed was not empty, it was heavy with suspicion and grief. In the early 1960s, a young mother didn't just disappear without a trace. The police arrived, their heavy boots pacing the floors Lucy had recently cleaned. They looked at her husband, Marvin Johnson. In the eyes of the law and the whispers of the neighbors, the husband is always the first chapter of a tragedy. They dug up the backyard, searching for a body they were certain was hidden. They pried up the floorboards and examined the foundations of the house, looking for the physical evidence of a crime that no one could prove. Marvin maintained a singular, haunting defense. She just left. For his children, Linda and her brother, their mother became a ghost long before she was ever declared dead. She was a woman reduced to a single grainy black-and-white photograph and a legacy of unanswered questions. Decades passed, and the archive of the missing grew cold. Lucy Ann Johnson was officially declared dead in the mid-1980s. On paper, she no longer existed. For the world, she was a statistic. For her daughter, Linda, she was a wound that refused to heal. Linda grew up in the shadow of that missing person report, haunted by the possibility that her father might have been responsible for her mother's disappearance. Every family dinner, every milestone was tainted by the ghost of the woman who wasn't there. The archive, those dusty boxes filled with police reports, was the only place where Lucy still lived. But as Linda entered her own 50s, she realized that she couldn't find peace until she found the truth, even if that truth was buried in a nameless grave. In 2013, Linda took a final symbolic step. She placed an advertisement in the newspapers of British Columbia and the Yukon. She shared that old photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a 1960s hairstyle, hoping someone might recognize a name or a face. At the same time, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police decided to take one last look at the cold case. Corporal Bert Pocket began digging through the digital archives, comparing them to the paper archives of 1961. The discovery was like a crack in the foundation of reality. In the rugged, vast expanse of the Yukon, a territory known as a place where people go to lose themselves, the name Lucy Ann Johnson appeared. The detective called Linda, his voice carrying the weight of a miracle and a mystery. "Linda," he said, "I think your mother is alive, and she is living in Whitehorse." The woman who had been dead on paper for 30 years was in fact breathing the cold air of the North. The realization was a violent collision of two different worlds. Lucy hadn't been kidnapped. She hadn't been murdered. She had simply reached a breaking point. In 1961, she had boarded a bus and traveled thousands of miles north to the end of the road where the wilderness begins. There, in the Yukon, she reinvented herself. She married again. She had 4 more children. She became a pillar of her community, a beloved mother and grandmother known for her kindness and strength. She never looked back. She buried the Lucy of 1961 so deep that even she had almost forgotten the sound of the door clicking shut in Surrey. When the two families finally met in Whitehorse, it was a scene of surreal emotional gravity. Linda, now a woman in her late 50s, stood face to face with a mother who was now an elderly stranger. She looked into the eyes of her half-siblings, people who had grown up with the heroic version of the woman who haunted Linda's nightmares. In the Yukon, Lucy was the matriarch of a happy home. Two versions of the same woman, separated by a thin veil of secrets and thousands of miles of Canadian wilderness. There were no easy answers, no cinematic reunions filled with perfect apologies. There was only the quiet, heavy reality that a life can be split in two and both halves can be true at the same time. This is the story that the archives usually hide. It is not a story of a crime, but a story of the human will to survive and the desperate need to start over, regardless of the cost. Lucy Ann Johnson was found. Her file was closed. But as the cameras fade and the records are filed away, a deeper question lingers in the air. Can you ever truly find someone who spent their whole life trying to be lost? In the Lost in the Archive collection, Lucy's folder sits in a special place for those who dared to cross the line between who they were and who they wanted to be, leaving a trail of broken hearts.